The assembly hall of Hastinapura has 1,000 columns. It is adorned with gold and lapis lazuli, and it has 100 gates. Dhritarashtra ordered it built quickly, and it rose quickly, the way things rise when a king cannot see clearly what he is building. Into this hall, on the day of the dice game, the full court assembled, kings, ministers, elders, warriors, to watch what was presented as a contest, but was, in every structural sense, an execution. Shakuni, the maternal uncle of Duryodhana, a man from the mountain kingdom of Gandhara, sat down across from Yudhishthira, the most righteous of the Pandavas, and threw the dice. After each round, after each stake was announced and lost, the same word rang through the hall. Jitam, won. It is won. That word, Jitam, from the root ji, to conquer, is one of the most dramatically charged syllables in the Mahabharata, the book of the assembly hall, the second of the 18 books of the Mahabharata, as compiled by Vedavyasa, Krishna Dvaipayana. Mahabharata contains, in its Ganguly numeration, chapters 43 through 72 covering the dice game. Its instigation, the game itself, Draupadi's humiliation, the first restoration, and the second game that sent 5 brothers into 13 years of exile. The dice that fell were called pasha, from the Sanskrit pasha, meaning both dice and snare, a word that carries in its 2 syllables the entire psychology of entrapment. The snare does not announce itself, it waits. To understand what Shakuni carried into that hall, we need to go back to Adi Parva, the first book, and to 2 pieces of information the text gives us that most readers absorb too quickly. The first is in chapter 110. Bhishma, then the guardian of the Kuru kingdom, traveled to Gandhara, in the northwest of the subcontinent, its capital Takshashila, near what is now Islamabad, to arrange the marriage of its princess Gandhari to Dhritarashtra, the elder son of Vichitravirya, who was blind by birth. Subala, king of Gandhara and father of Gandhari, was initially reluctant, precisely because of that blindness. He agreed, the text tells us, after considering the high reputation of the Kuru royal family. It was a pragmatic capitulation, not a willing gift. And Gandhari herself, the canonical text is clear, did not want the marriage. Bhishma gave her no choice. She responded in her wordless and devastating way by blindfolding herself for the rest of her life, voluntarily entering the darkness of her husband's world, rather than seeing a world in which she had no agency. Shakuni watched his sister do this. He was there when it happened. That is the wound the canonical text actually shows us. Not a dungeon, not bones carved into dice. Those belong to Jain retellings and regional folk traditions. Powerful narratives in their own right, but not recoverable in the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute's critical edition, the scholarly reconstruction of the oldest text assembled by comparing 1,259 manuscripts between 1919 and 1966. The Bori text shows us something subtler and perhaps more disturbing. A brother who watched his sister disappear into a blindfold, who accompanied her to Hastinapura, and who then returned to Gandhara, and kept returning, the text tells us, to look after her and her children, the Kauravas. He was present across decades. The second piece of information from Adi Parva is in chapter 67, the Amshavatara section. The listing of the partial incarnations of cosmic entities into the characters of this epic. Vaishampayana, narrating to King Janamejaya, identifies Shakuni as the partial incarnation of Dwapara, the presiding entity of Dwapara Yuga, the Third Age. Duryodhana is identified as the incarnation of Kali, the presiding entity of the Darkest Age. The word Dwapara itself means in its root sense, gambling. Deceit is the mindset of gambling, the dice are its implement. This cosmological frame is not decoration. It means that Shakuni's deceptive nature is not simply biographical, it is epochally appropriate. In Dwapara Yuga, the text tells us, Divine intellect ceases to exist, and it is therefore seldom that anyone is wholly truthful. Shakuni is not merely a man from the mountains with a grievance. He is an age walking in human form. He was born, the text says, to destroy righteousness. This makes the Sabha account of the dice game something stranger and more terrible than a revenge story. Consider the structure of Shakuni's intelligence. After Yudhishthira performs the Rajasuya Yajna, the great royal sacrifice that confirmed the Pandavas' supremacy, Shakuni and Duryodhana remain as guests and witness the extraordinary wealth of Indraprastha. They return to Hastinapura, and it is then that Shakuni notices Duryodhana's distress, his jealousy, his barely contained rage at the Pandavas' prosperity. He does not generate this emotion in his nephew. He reads it. He amplifies it. The Adi Parva describes Duryodhana as the tree of wrath and Shakuni as its branches. The branch does not produce the tree's nature. It extends it, gives it reach, makes it capable of shading everything beneath. Shakuni's counsel is precise. The Pandava brothers cannot be defeated in battle or by virtuous means. The only path to their defeat runs through Yudhishthira's one vulnerability, his fondness for the dice. And here the trap reveals its elegance, because it is not simply that Yudhishthira enjoys gambling. It is that the Dharma of that era made it impossible for a Kshatriya to refuse a challenge to dice. The Dharma of those days was that if you invited a Kshatriya for a duel or a game of dice, he could not say no. He had to come. Yudhishthira arrives already bound. The hall with its 1,000 columns and its 100 gates is a closed system before a single piece is placed on the board. There is a quality in Shakuni's strategy that Sanskrit ethical vocabulary struggles to name cleanly. The concept of kshanti, forbearance, patience rooted in virtue, clearly does not apply. Neither does titiksha, the stoic endurance of hardship, in its noble register. What Shakuni demonstrates is something the tradition recognized as a psychological phenomenon without granting it a single clean term. The disciplined containment of wrath across time, weaponized into action, call it krodha titiksha, the endurance of anger, held and shaped across years until it becomes strategy rather than explosion. This is the patience the title names, not the patience of saints, the patience of cruelty. Consider someone you may have known, or been, a younger sibling who watched a parent consistently defer to the older child, excusing every failure, redirecting every conversation. For years nothing is said. The anger goes inward. It is refined. It becomes a kind of expertise, an encyclopedic understanding of every crack in the family's emotional architecture, every pressure point, every fear the older sibling carries. And then at a moment of the younger sibling's choosing, over something that looks trivial from the outside, the architecture comes down. The people watching say, "Where did this come from?" It came out of nowhere. It did not come from nowhere. It was built room by room across a decade of silence. Shakuni's tactical mastery shows itself most clearly in one detail. Duryodhana announces before the game begins that he will not play himself. Shakuni will play on his behalf. A murmur goes through the assembly, the text tells us. Everyone knows Shakuni is an uncanny dicer, and yet Yudhishthira cannot leave. He is a kshatriya. The invitation has been given. The round-by-round loss that follows has its own terrible cadence. The treasury, the army, the personal jewels, the ornaments of his brothers, the kingdom, the brothers themselves, Yudhishthira himself, and finally, in the 20th round, Draupadi. Jitam, 1. Jitam, 1. The word lands like a blade laid quietly on a table after each transaction. Draupadi's intervention and her challenge, that she is not property, that Yudhishthira lost himself before wagering her, and thus had no authority to offer her, breaks the first game open. The assembly agrees. The entire gambling game is declared invalid. Yudhishthira recovers everything. It is a moment of dharmic restoration that the text gives us fully, and Shakuni absorbs it. Duryodhana pressures Dhritarashtra for a second game. One stake only. The losing side exiled for 13 years, the 13th incognito. Shakuni wins again. The Pandavas are removed from the board for over a decade, which is precisely what a patient strategist needs. The irony the canonical text preserves, and it deserves attention, is that in the Vana Parva, Shakuni at one point advised Duryodhana to consider restoring the Pandavas' kingdom. He was, by some readings, a man who had already achieved his purpose through the dice, and did not want the full catastrophe of Kurukshetra. But Duryodhana could not stop. The tree had grown past the branches. In the Drona Parva, Shakuni creates 100 different illusions against Arjuna on the battlefield. Animals, weapons, creatures, birds, a final deployment of Maya, the Sanskrit term for illusion, from the root indicating creative and deceptive power. He is Mayavi to the end. On the 18th day, after the Kaurava commander Shalya has fallen, Shakuni's son Ulaka is killed by Sahadeva. And here, only here, the text shows us the rupture in Shakuni's control. Beholding his son slain, Shakuni, with voice choked with tears, and drawing deep breaths, recollected the words of Vidura. That phrase is extraordinary. The man who spent decades managing Krodha, rage, wrath, against the family that wronged his sister, who bent that rage into every patient calculation of the dice game, is undone not by philosophy, but by a dead child. He recalled the warnings of Vidura, the one voice in Hastinapura who had consistently named what was coming. He reflected with tearful eyes, and then he ran towards Sahadeva with a lance adorned with gold. Sahadeva responded with a carefully aimed, broad-headed arrow, forged of hard iron, and tipped with golden wings. The arrow severed Shakuni's head from his body. Sahadeva, who had taken his vow to kill Shakuni on the day of the dice game, fulfilled it here in Shalya Parva, chapter 28, verse 46. The Pandava army, joined by Krishna, blew their conches. The Svargarohanika Parva, the 18th and final book, gives Shakuni's afterlife a cosmological resolution. His soul rejoined Dvapara. He returned to what he always was, an age, wearing flesh, completing its function, and dissolving back into the turning of time. What to carry forward into your actual day? Shakuni's psychology lives, not only in epic villains. It lives in the place where an old wound meets a new skill set, where grief or humiliation, left unaddressed, becomes not healing, but expertise. The Sanskrit tradition names Krodha as a force that must be witnessed honestly, not suppressed into strategy. The moment Shakuni's discipline broke was the moment he became fully human, a father watching his son die. That breaking, the text seems to suggest, was more truthful than any throw of the dice. Patience that serves cruelty is still cruelty.